Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. You've joined Philip K. Dick Talks, and this is Dan Abella from the Philip K. Dick Festival. Give me 1 second. And this is Dan Abella from the. Excellent. There was a little bit of echo, a little Philip K. Dick phenomena. Well, I'm very happy to introduce Paul Levy. Who is an author and writer, and he is the author of The Madness of George Bush, Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil, Awakened by Darkness, When Evil Becomes Your Father, and The Quantum Revelation, a radical synthesis of science and spirituality. A Tibetan Buddhist practitioner for over 30 years, he has intimately studied with some of the greatest spiritual masters of Tibet and Burma. He was the coordinator of the Portland chapter of the PadmaSambhava Buddhist Center for over 30 years. Welcome, Paul. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. Yeah, I just really appreciate the invitation. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Fantastic. We always I always feel that at some level, Philip K. Dick is the center for so many of the things we talk about and our interests. And I first came when I actually, for those who are watching, these are two fantastic books, The Quantum Revelation and Dispelling Wetiko, both written by Paul over here. So I came across your mentioning of Phil when I was reading The Quantum Revelation. And then later, of course, when I started reading Wetiko, I think you mentioned it there as well. And in a recent interview with Anthony Peake, you actually mentioned, you sent me an article where you discuss Philip K. Dick, as well as another favorite writer of mine, Colin Wilson. So, but before we go there, please give me like the cliff notes of what has the kind of experiences that you've had that made you think that there is something called Wetiko. What's bringing you to this station in your life?
Yeah, for sure. So basically, I'll be 65 in a couple months. When I was in my early 20s, without going into the story, I did write a book about it, but I was in deep suffering from a trauma. Basically at the hands of a psychopathic father, but that's a story for another day. And I went inwards into my mind, really just assuming the position of the witness, because that's the only thing that made me feel any better. And I was just doing it hours and hours and hours a day for a couple years. And I had this spiritual awakening. I got hit by a bolt of lightning just in my brain. It ignited, and I went into this unbelievable altered state in which I was beginning to recognize that we're having a collectively shared dream. And basically stuff began happening in my life that was physically impossible, that could only happen in dreams, particularly when I was meeting my teachers, particularly when I was around these great teachers. But within 24 hours, I had such this radical personality change that I got thrown in a mental hospital and diagnosed as mentally ill and put on drugs. And during that next couple of years, probably 4 or 5 times, because I was just a free agent out in the world, I wasn't in an ashram or a monastery, I had this proclivity to get myself thrown in mental hospitals and diagnosed. And I knew I was having a spiritual awakening. Not for 1 second did I buy into the diagnosis. It was like I'd gotten introduced to this higher dimensional world that was containing and informing and underlying our world and expressing itself through our world. And so I was fortunate in that, because it was so obvious to me that I was having a spiritual awakening. That's what saved me. So then I got out of the psychiatric community as soon as I could, really pretty soon. And I continued my awakening. And it's been 40 years now. Actually, in a couple of weeks will be the 40-year anniversary of the awakening that I had. And I'm still unpacking what was shown to me. And that's what really opened me up to find my work on the mind virus, the Wetiko mind virus, the quantum nature of things. And then when I found Philip K. Dick's work, it blew my mind when I realized, oh my God, he is word for word describing what I've spent my life pointing at in this mind virus, and as has, you know, with the mind parasites that you mentioned.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. For a second, there seemed to be. I wouldn't be surprised if during this transmission, the mind parasites will try to. Exactly, that's what I was going to say. The mind parasites will try to interfere, or because I do believe there is something that we need to explore a little bit further. Now, Paul, I can hear you, but okay, great.
Right now, okay, Mike, that's so weird how that happened. So now it switched cameras. So maybe I'll just go over here.
As I said, I've had some real technical issues with my computer the last hour.
I call this the non-local demons. The non-local demons, those are the mind parasites.
Exactly.
One virus, where because it's non-local, they're connected to the field right when a transmission, because they can't stand to be seen. You know, Wetiko, the mind virus, the mind parasites, as soon as somebody is seeing them, they, through their non-local connection to the field, they'll like turn off the video, they'll shut down the microphone, they'll try to do anything and everything to distract from being exposed.
And I absolutely agree with that. I do believe there's something very sinister, something that's going on, and that it goes beyond the basic narrative of disinformation and right versus left. I think there's something that that needs to be explored a little bit further. But how now? First of all, let's unpack. Let's backtrack a little bit. How did you arrive at the name Wetiko? What made you choose that name versus, let's say, malignant agoraphrenia or some or mind parasite? What is so special about that?
So before I came across, the word Wetiko, it's a Native American term,
right?
And so I had written, when I wrote the book, The Madness of George W. Bush, a reflection of our collective psychosis, I was pointing at what Wetiko is. So let's see. Okay, so now the camera switched again. That's strange. So I was pointing at what Wetiko is, but I didn't have the name for it. I hadn't come across Wetiko, so I called it malignant egophrenia, ME disease, me disease. It's a misidentification of who we think we are. We identify with a false, fictitious identity. And then I came across the Wetiko idea, and this is a Native American idea. It's a cannibalistic spirit. It's the source of all the evil in the world and the evil that we play out. It's a collective psychosis. It's at the root of the collective madness that we're playing out. And because it was a sacred name in indigenous Native American tradition, I went with that, with Wetiko. And so that's really why I use that word.
Now, how would Wetiko differ from an ontological perspective from someone who is just highly selfish, who just thinks about himself, who doesn't care about? I mean, what is the difference, the ontological difference between the two?
Yeah, I mean, somebody who's selfish or narcissistic, I mean, that's an aspect of Wetiko. But Wetiko it's like, think of it like a higher dimensional object that emanates itself into the lower third dimensions, you know, and has all these aspects or facets. So for somebody to say, oh, Wetiko is just the lower self or just the shadow self or the narcissistic or selfishness or greed, yeah, all of those are aspects of Wetiko, but Wetiko is non-local. Wetiko is so psychedelic. And if I can just give you an example, Wetiko is an inner disease of the soul. It's a psychospiritual disease of the soul that explicates itself, that somehow is able to extend itself out into the physical world and seemingly and synchronistically configure events in the outer world so as to reflect the state of a psyche that's under its thrall. That's way trippier than just, the greedy self or the selfish person, you know? So, and what that means is that Wetiko, being an inner disease of the psyche of the soul, it actually is revealing itself through the medium of the outside world. That's completely amazing. And that's like a dream. And that's why Wetiko, it's a dreamed up phenomena. We're literally creating it every moment. We're colluding with it. and it's actually introducing us to that we're having a dream. So encoded in the poison of Wetiko is the vaccine, is the medicine. That's
Right.
really trippier than just saying, oh, it's just somebody who's selfish.
Exactly. Now, for those who, I'm here playing devil's advocate. Now, we could say that right now, the 21st century, compared to, say, first century Rome or 5th century Europe, or even that, the violence that's being perpetrated is not as extreme or as visceral. Maybe not so much psychological, but visceral. So some people might argue that things are actually getting a little bit better in terms of the way people relate to each other and respect each other. There is a little bit more acceptance when you compare to, say, the 100 years war in Europe and so on. So what I suspect, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Wetiko now is taking almost like a different turn, that the violence is still there, but it's more internal, more psychological, more psychic, and not so obviously external in the sense of a war or some sort of carnage.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting contemplation. I'm very aware of the perspective of some people think, oh, things are way better than they've ever been. And from one point of view, that's true. Now, the thing about, just to get into the answer to that, the thing about Wetiko is that it operates through the blind spots.
Right.
It's a form of blindness, of psychic blindness, which means that it can't stand to be seen. So, because when we see it, then it has no power over us. But if we don't see it, we unwittingly become the instrument through which it acts itself out into the world. And so, yeah, it's continually shapeshifting.
Got it.
So that we do enact the violence. It's a psychic violence that we enact, whether it's in our intimate relationships or towards ourselves. But the one other part of the equation is that we have way more powerful weapons of mass destruction,
right,
to completely blow up the whole planet, or at least end our species in a way that we didn't have back in Rome.
Got it. Now, when you started, Philip K. Dick, he's known, for those who are familiar with his work, he's known for his mystical experiences. For what he refers to as 2374 event, where he allegedly was hit after opening the door and answering a woman, was hit by a pink beam, which knocked him out unconscious, and briefly he felt he was in first century Rome. How does that, and then later on he had a series of hallucinations or experiences where he wasn't sure what it was, whether it was like a psychic breakdown or some sort of UFO, or we call Valis, or some sort of sentient being. How is that parallel the Wetiko kind of an episode that someone might have?
Yeah, well, Philip K. Dick spent his whole rest of his life after that episode in 1974, trying to figure out what happened. And one day he would contemplate it from the point of view of that he had, become enlightened, or he had become Christ, or he was completely insane. And he just changed his viewpoint depending on the moment, because he was really trying to wrap his mind around something. And one way of understanding is that he had stepped out of his habitual identity, and maybe even saw the deeper, the higher dimension that informs this third dimensional world that we live in. And but now the thing about Wetiko, see, it's a quantum phenomena in the sense that it's the source of all the evil and the madness that we play out, and it actually, if we hold it in a certain way, it actually is the greatest catalyst for evolution ever known to humanity. But it all depends what we do with it. So he had a term in his writings, in his exegesis, his journal, his letters. He talked about, as you know, the black iron
prison, right?
The BIP, the black iron prison.
Right.
That the way he would use that term and the way he would delineate it and describe it, it's exactly Wetiko. And so that blew my mind when I realized, because spiritual traditions throughout history, that, they've all been pointing at Wetiko. It's in the apocryphal text. They call it a counterfeiting spirit. And of course, Wetiko wrote, edited out the counterfeiting spirit phrase from the Bible because Wetiko was on the editorial board of the Bible and it didn't want to be exposed. And so, but every spiritual tradition is pointing at Wetiko. And so it blew my mind when Philip K. Dick and other thinkers and artists, I have 2 new books coming out about this, they're all pointing at Wetiko in their unique way.
It's interesting because from a theological or point of view, there's some people who have concluded that the very presence of Wetiko, or the very presence of this kind of evil in the world, suggests that there's a God that presides over it, that is more of a demiurge. Well, the real God exists above it all, and yet the parallel explanation, which we can see very clearly in the Bible, is that Satan or whoever is the adversary clearly works hand in hand with the Creator to kind of advance our evolution, but by challenging us, especially our weakest points.
That's exactly right. And Satan, is an equivalent, term for Wetiko. And, and the inner meaning of Satan is, one of the inner meanings is the adversary.
Right.
I appreciate your point that, they seem completely antagonistic and adversarial. There's Christ and the Antichrist. And yet behind the scenes, it's really interesting that they're working in concert and, to actually spur the evolution of our species. That's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I think there's truth there, definitely.
Would you say that Wetiko then is a kind of a neutral force, or what you say is inherently evil is how our point of view interprets it?
Well, the thing is, here's the thing that, I have an edge for people, a lot of like these new age magical thinking people who are like, oh, evil's not real. There's no such thing as evil, and them turning a blind eye towards evil, feeds evil. So evil, and, I'm not talking as a, as person who's like a theology professor. That's not my field. I'm just talking empirically, psychologically. We have to come to terms with evil. Evil is a reality, a psychological reality in the world. Wetiko, like you're saying, it's a quantum phenomena that it's the source of the greatest evil that our species plays out, both individually and collectively. And it is the greatest spur to our evolution. Physics. What is the nature of light? It's either a wave or a particle, depending on how you observe it. Same thing. Wetiko will either manifest in its incredibly destructive way or in this unbelievably awakening, constructive way, depending on if we have the recognition of what it's showing us. It's a revelation. Wetiko is a revelation. That's the bottom line.
I find it very interesting that that these issues have never been, both the Mind Parasites, written by Colin Wilson, and any of the work of the Black Iron Prison, it seems to be like almost hands off when it comes to for Hollywood to make a film or a major. The closest we've seen is The Matrix, which is not quite on the same level, but something a lot more dark. Because after I read the Mind Parasites by Colin Wilson, I was like absolutely fascinated, because here I saw an understanding of what's really happening to the human race and how certain people reach a certain level of achievement, and then they get brought down almost precipitously. And I was hoping that when I read this book 20, 30 years ago, that there would be a movie, there would be some talk about it, and yet it's silent. So many people have never heard of the Mind Parasites, except the Colin Wilson fanatics or heads.
Right.
And the same with Philip K. Dick, when he talks about how we actually live in first century Rome. I mean, that's one interpretation of his experience.
Right.
Very little of that.
Right. Well, it's so interesting, because in my next book, I have 2 new books on Wetiko coming out, because, it's in the Castaneda books. They don't use the word Wetiko, but they call it, Don Juan calls it the topic of topics. There's nothing more important in the world to understand today than Wetiko. It's underlying all the destruction we're acting out in every channel on every scale. And yet you're right, so in my next book, I have a chapter on the mind parasites. I have a chapter on the Black Iron Prison, pointing out that they're like creatively pointing at Wetiko. And isn't it interesting that Hollywood, has not made, films about that? And I would point out that's not an accident. That that the forces of Wetiko, the last thing it wants, Wetiko's nightmare, would be, for all these multimediums to be creatively articulating and flooding light and showing how Wetiko works out in the world and in our minds. Because when enough of us see that, we then, the Wetiko mind virus gets unemployed. It gets out of business, and we become empowered. And that's the nightmare for Wetiko.
You mentioned something that was absolutely brilliant in your article regarding how, according to Philip K. Dick, the way you outdo Wetiko is to forfeit the forfeit.
Yeah. He talks about, a fake. So in other words, Wetiko is a counterfeiting spirit. And so it impersonates us. It puts us on like a suit of clothes, but also fooling us. And then if we're not awake in that moment, we identify with its false version, its, wounded, limited, traumatized image of who we are. And then at that point, we've given ourselves away and we've identified with who we're not, which is a recipe for madness. Because Wetiko can't steal our soul, but it tricks us into giving it away ourselves. And so Wetiko, it imitates us, it impersonates us. So what Philip K. Dick, which just blew my mind when I came across this, he was saying, then the real source of being itself, it imitates the imitator. It actually, creates this mimic of the mimicker of Wetiko as a way. But it has to do this on the sly, or Wetiko would be awake to it and then deflect it. So the true nature of being, the divine being itself, then impersonates Wetiko. Wetiko then takes it in, and then from inside Wetiko, the ground of being itself subsumes Wetiko into its light. So Philip K. Dick created a whole cosmology of how this happens. And it's in the article. I quote him a lot. How he's saying this, and it's brilliant because he's not just pointing out, how this mind virus works. He's pointing out the solution. And so I just, it's because of that I included a whole chapter, a major chapter in my next book on Philip K. Dick's, on his visionary way of seeing how to handle and deal with this mind virus that is just destroying us. I mean, to the point where we're not awake to it, we unwittingly become its minions and instruments, and then it acts itself out through us.
I find that kind of reminds me a little bit of The Sly Man by Gurdjieff, where he talks about being in the world, but not part of the world. What I would say maybe a danger of forfeiting the forfeit is that you could still be, the person would have to be truly awake because he might be pulled and seduced by Wetiko while forfeiting itself.
Yeah. Well, the thing about, Wetiko, Wetiko has no creativity at all, but like I was saying, it's a master impersonator. So by then tricking us into identifying with it, it plugs into our creativity in such a way, because we have, each of us 24/7, our entire lives, we have this God-given creativity. We have a genius. We're creative geniuses. That's our nature, is to be creative. But if we're not awake to that and conscious of it and implementing our creativity on a daily basis, Wetiko then plugs into our creativity and turns it against us in a way that feeds it and kills us. So, and the thing about Wetiko, it's incredibly sly. You're absolutely right in the sense that unless, like, if we think, I really see Wetiko and I'm onto it, or I don't have Wetiko, well, those are perspectives that show you're under the thrall, because we all, like, Wetiko, it exists it pervades the non-local field that exists in the collective unconscious of our species. And if we think, oh, that person out there, whoever that person is, has Wetiko, say they're really embodying it, and if I don't, well, it feeds off of separation. It feeds off of fear. Then that perspective is showing you've fallen under the thrall of the bug. But if you recognize that person has Wetiko is reflecting the part of me that has Wetiko, then you're cooking. Then you've actually found the way in to integrate your own Wetiko.
It's almost like the way out of it is by owning your own, what Jung would say, owning your projection.
Yeah. Owning your projection, owning your shadow, but not just personal shadow, but archetypal shadow. That you don't. It's so tricky because you don't want to identify with the archetypal shadow, but you want to have the recognition. Oh yeah, I don't exist as an individualized person, as a separate self. I'm actually interrelated with the whole field, and so I don't just have a personal shadow. I have a transpersonal archetypal shadow that I need to own, but it's also not mine. I need to not identify with it. And so the whole point is, you see, Wetiko can potentially introduce us to who we are, who we actually are, our true nature. And when we get introduced to the true nature, then we're free of Wetiko. Then Wetiko can't touch us. And because of that, that's why Wetiko sets up a simulation of who we are, the fictitious identity. And once we identify with that, it can manipulate and control that. But it can't touch the true part of us.
What's your a lot of people after a year of being locked down and dealing with listening to stories of death and the possibility of death from, how do you some of them claim that they've given up on this rat race, so they're more now going to be closer to their family and more accepting. How long do you think that will last before Wetiko finds a way? I mean, I'm sure there'll be some people that have awakened to the kind of artificial reality that were existing before, but what's your take on that? I mean, do you think this is a permanent or it's only a matter of time before Wetiko finds another angle to get people back under its
Well, I mean, I think what Wetiko is, like in the Bible, they say that the devil is the ruler of this world, and the ruler, the archons have, the Gnostics have the archons, and the me, which is equivalent term for Wetiko, and the archons, the definition is ruler. So there, Wetiko, it pervades. It's not just like, oh, it's in abeyance right now. No, that it's like underlying and informing what's playing out in the world. And got people who think, oh, we're going to get back to normal. I mean, they're out of their minds. I mean, honestly, in the sense that it's very sinister what's playing out in the world with, centralizing power and control and vaccine passports and just, on and on and on. And so I would say, that, yeah, this is the time where Wetiko, where the evil of Wetiko, it's coming out and it's apparent, it's being visible. It's coming out from hiding in the corners or underground, forcing us to confront parts of ourselves that up until now, it's been easy just to think, oh, I'll just, I'll do my work tomorrow. I'll start spiritual practice tomorrow, where there's no time to waste. I mean, it's in our face.
So will you say, what things can people can start doing to recognize the Wetiko inside them? I mean, what?
Yeah, well, right. The thing is, I mean, any sort of, both spiritual work and psychological work, it doesn't make a difference what the tradition is. But the point is, so on the one hand, to own your stuff, like you were saying, own your projections, deal with your shadow, become fluent with your dreams, with your inner process, with your psychological process, but also connect spiritually. But even more than that, you see, the thing is, Wetiko, it both burns your creativity, in that when you get taken over by it or infected by it, you disconnect from your creative voice, but it also spurs your creativity. It's a quantum phenomena. And so the idea is that, you see, the greatest poison in the psyche is unexpressed creativity. So the extent that we're able to actually access our creativity, our creative genius, and our creative spirit, whatever the medium is, that is toxic to Wetiko.
So being creative or unleashing our own personal creativity is one way to
Oh, it's the way, because the way it works, we all talk about, oh, I want to get in touch with my true nature, with my self, right? Which, yeah, that's the idea, because then, the self can't be possessed. It's unpossessable. So Wetiko can't touch it. But how do you get in touch with yourself? You have to express yourself creatively to actually have sort of this knowing of yourself, to have realization of yourself. And when you realize yourself, it's not just a static place. What does the self do? The self is a creative entity that's continually recreating itself. So then when you know yourself, you express yourself creatively. And by expressing yourself creatively, you know yourself even deeper in a positive feedback loop, that you're actually creating yourself moment by moment in a way that's Wetiko free. That's what I'm talking about.
A lot of people would might find, for them creativity and making a living are like two separate things, and they almost understand. They even call it the treadmill or the rat race.
Right.
It's almost like a lot of their jobs. I mean, I was a technical recruiter for many years, and I felt that when I actually quit that job, for a few days, I didn't know who I was.
Right.
Because I felt that it's almost like I was under the kind of alien influence.
Right.
But I'm afraid some people might have a hard time reconciling being creative and still making a living in this kind of materialistic society we so much live in.
Right. No, and I get that. I understand that. I mean, and for me, I mean, I was struggling with that for years. Yeah, I had this awakening in 1981. I recognized, oh yeah, we're having a collective dream. Great. Well, that and $1 will get you a cup of coffee or something.
Right.
So then what do I do? How do I like step into the dream in a way that I'm going to be supported? And how I figured out what to do was, well, if this is a dream, wouldn't you imagine that stepping into the dream and helping other people to realize the dreamlike nature and their latent creative genius would get supported by the dream? And that's exactly what's happened. I haven't had to have a job for like over 25 years, because all I do is just trip out on this. I have a whole community and groups and single people, and give talks and lectures and write books, and it's all just following. So I had the courage and the integrity to follow the thread, follow my intuition, where the whole universe was telling me, no, you can't do that, you're crazy, you're mentally ill, you're this, you're that. And I just, never for a moment, believed any of that, because I was just following my process. And the idea, you see, what you're asking is such a good question about how do you make a living, making a living and being creative. They seem really, opposite worlds. And part of it is that we've internalized the story. Oh yeah, we have to have a day job that we don't really love. That's not our passion, because we have to pay the bills. And yeah, there is truth to that up until a point. But like so many of us have just, that's been installed in our psyche like a program. And then we invest in the truth of that story. And then we create that reality that confirms our point of view. It's like this. It's like we're so incredibly creative that people who feel, oh no, I'm not creative at all, by the power of their infinite creativity, they've created the experience of themselves not being creative. And they'll then draw all the evidence confirming the truth of their viewpoint, not realizing then their experience of not being creative is an expression of their incredible creative genius.
Yeah, it's one thing I find interesting the last year or two is this approach to taking anything that people are experiencing as biochemical in nature. And I'm afraid Big Pharma and other industries are going to step forward and provide the cure, quote unquote, for those who are feeling sad or depressed or unhappy with their lives, rather than a more spiritual or a more consciousness-based solution.
Yeah. Well, no, that's a fear, even with all the renaissance in plant medicine and psychedelia and stuff, like Big Pharma is right there to want to copyright and monopolize, because, Big Pharma, it's the biggest criminal enterprise in the country. There's no question about that. And Big Pharma almost killed me. When I was having my awakening and I got hospitalized and diagnosed, not only, when I was talking about the abuse from my father, not only did they protect my father and not believe me, and not only did they not see the healthy part of me that was awakening, But then they misdiagnosed me as being, oh, you're manic depressive, you have a chemical imbalance, having an illness that I didn't have. And then they forced down my throat certain pharmaceuticals that literally made me sick. And once I became sick, that confirmed to them their viewpoint that, oh, well, they're really correct, that I am sick, because take a look at me. And I had been sick, and I had been made sick by them. And then from their point of view, and just, trip out on this, a successful treatment from their point of view is if I would have agreed with their version of who I was. In other words, that I was mentally ill and I would have to be on pharmaceuticals for the rest of my life. If I had subscribed to that, they would say, oh, another successful treatment. And it would have killed me. I mean, What's wrong with that picture,
Well, one of the things I do, you mentioned psychedelic earlier, is that I run a small psychedelic festival. I basically started as an attempt to counter the highly materialistic stream that most are experiencing. But one of the things we're doing this year is raising funds for our veterans who suffer from PTSD, non-medicinal. And we really feel that it's essential that a lot of people recognize that a lot of their anger and sadness and experiences might be because the life they're leading is false, or it's not is incomplete, rather than pushing it down. What advice do you have for those who are having a spiritual awakening? I mean, especially if they don't know anyone, one day they wake up, they realize they're
Well, one of the things when somebody, because I feel like I'm kind of an expert in that. So I was having a full-blown spiritual awakening, and it almost killed me. I mean, it drove me crazy, but it was a shamanic sort of crazy, a creative illness, and it destroyed my entire family. I haven't had a family for 20 years, because they all bought into that. Oh, Paul is just mentally ill and in denial of his illness. So I kind of know of what I speak when I say, when you're having a spiritual awakening, it's like, you're in this incredibly open state, and it's like snapping out of a spell, and like the programs that you've been conditioned your whole life are getting uninstalled. So You're so fragile and so vulnerable. And if then people pathologize you because you've stepped out of your character and you're acting, like seemingly with this aberrant behavior, you'll be sickened by that. It can really impact you in a negative way, as if you're being put under a spell. And it's tragic. There are some people in mental hospitals their whole lives who are having a spiritual awakening, initiatory shamanic experience, get misdiagnosed, get concretized in that pathological identity, and spend their lives in a backward of psychiatry. It's tragic. So one of the key things is to, there's not a lot of people who, based on experience, not by reading books or writing papers, but based on experience, have navigated through that. And so I can, I'm this wounded healer. I'm a work in progress. I'm still dealing with my stuff. I'm not any enlightened person, but I've been through that incredible darkness. I've made my descent into the shamanic underworld so deeply and haven't gotten stuck there. That's the archetype. The spiritually awakening person, guaranteed you're going to descend into the darkness. So at a certain point, I realized the hospitalizations, instead of being an error and aborting my spiritual awakening, actually were my shamanic descent. It was part of the awakening. I was descending into Hades, into the hell realm, and I could not believe the madness and the insanity and the abuse that was riddling the psychiatric mental health community. But the fact that I didn't stay stuck there, and then the archetype is that the shaman, wounded healer, they come back, they're able to not get stuck in the underworld. They come back to the world with gifts based on what they experienced. So that's why I'm able to help people who are going through spiritual awakenings, but it doesn't have to be me. The idea is that anybody else who's had experience and integrated it enough to connect with other people who can recognize that you are having a spiritual awakening, and it can help you to integrate it. That's what's needed.
So what are some signs that the person's having a spiritual awakening? There are some who might be having one and they don't even know it. So what are things to look for?
Okay, well, on the one hand, we all have an intuitive sense that something's not right in the world. Then we have an intuitive sense, wow, it's like we're collectively mad. Then we have a sense of, wow, it's like we're rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. as we're destroying ourselves. But then all of that's the precursor. Then when you, so for me, when on that day I got hit by the bolt of lightning and within 24 hours I got thrown in a mental hospital, I was realizing, oh my God, we're having a collective dream. I was realizing, wow, we're dream characters in each other's dreams, which is to say that we're interconnected, we're interdependent. The energetic expression of that is compassion. I was, just, it was a visceral experience. It wasn't intellectual. And the realization, like, oh my God, we're dreaming up this universe moment by moment into materialization. If you remember, I was saying Wetiko, it's a dreamed up phenomena. We are literally moment by moment complicit in creating, our own, if you call it Wetiko or whatever you want to call it. So, connecting with, oh my God, I'm creative. Every moment, even if I wash dishes, if I walk over, every moment I'm creating my experience of myself. I'm creating my experience of the world. All of that is pointing at that you're beginning to snap out of that fictitious spell of imagining you exist as a separate self, as a skin-encapsulated ego who exists, in this limited condition in third-dimensional space and time, and you're having the realization, oh my God, who I am is non-local. Who I am is part of the whole universe, that I'm not separate from the universe. This is what quantum physics has discovered, that this universe is a quantum universe on every scale, through and through, and there's no separate parts interacting. There's just a wholeness. That's
let's talk for the next few minutes that we have, a few more minutes, about your book, The Quantum Revelation, which is almost like an extension of Wetiko, but also explores other dimensions. Go on.
Yeah, I could totally say. So what quantum physics has discovered, it's the medicine for Wetiko. And I can explain it really simply. Before quantum physics came on the scene, century ago, more or less, scientists thought this universe existed objectively, separate from them, and they were trying to understand how it worked. But they were just passive observers. Quantum physics comes onto the scene, comes into the world, comes into our mind, and it literally shows us that there is no objective world, that's a nonsensical idea. It only exists as an idea in our head with no correlate in reality whatsoever. And even more than that, that the act of observing this universe actually influences the universe observed. That's an exact description of a dream. What that means is that the act of observation is creative, that we're not passive observers, that we're participants in evoking the very universe that we're inhabiting. And so that's the rabbit hole that quantum physics is showing. Wait a second, if there's nothing objective out there, there's not only no objective things, there's no things, there's no separate anything. It's all an interconnected, seamlessly interdependent quantum field that we're a part of, and that our perception of the universe is a key factor in the equation of the creation of the universe. What that means when you realize the act of observation is creative is that we possess this enormous, unimaginable creative power that we have 24/7. But to the extent that we're not using it consciously, it's getting turned against us in a way that's killing us. That's what my work is about. And you see, when you understand that there's no objective world, it sheds light on who's the subject. Wait a second. If there's no objective world, I, as a subject, need an object to be in relationship to in order to be a subject. But if there's nothing objective, then who am I? You see, the major question that science is asking, this is, some of the founding fathers are saying this. The prime task of science is to answer the question, who am I? Quantum physics is flooding light on, when there's no objective world, who's the subject? That's us. But we don't exist in the way we've been entrained to think we do if we think we exist as a separate self. So quantum physics has promoted itself to be a spiritual path.
It's interesting. It's almost like a lot of the physicists today, I would say still a majority, don't even want to go there. They rather focus on quantum physics as being a statistical model and engineering model. But when you start really pegging them on the philosophical or spiritual a lot of them don't even want to discuss it. They're like the first ones to say, well, I'm not, that's
right. And that's what exactly, because the idea of talking about how consciousness has entered the physics lab, and they can't make it go away. That's not what your typical academic corporate physicist is signed up for, because it challenges their view of the world and of themselves and of their place in the world. And that's not what they went to graduate school for. So it's only the exceptional quantum physicist who has the courage and the intelligence to really follow the thread and see where it leads. Absolutely. There's such a taboo in, academic corporate physics to really sort of to follow, what's being shown by the fact that consciousness, is a prime factor in the equation of this universe, for sure.
Yeah, it's I recall reading some works by Fred Alan Wolf, but even before that, Bohm talking about the implicit and explicit orders, and these are certainly a small group of really cutting edge scientists. Schrodinger, Heisenberg, they all felt there was definitely, but of course they didn't discuss it explicitly. The concept of consciousness entered into the equation. So I have a question here from one of our on the chat room is, can you ask how Wetiko goes against Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is that whatever, we all have like these weak points, so, and we're trying to fulfill Maslow's hierarchy of needs in whatever way we do, emotional, spiritual, physical, whatever. But Wetiko, we all have like our inferior function, the weak points or unconscious. So whatever part of us is unconscious, it has that weak point. That's the way Wetiko will insinuate itself through that unconscious blind spot, play itself out so that we don't see it. You see, the thing about Wetiko, it works through the projective tendencies of the mind. So, we're always projecting. This is a dream, right? Just like what is it but a projection? We're projecting onto the ink blot, and the ink blot instantaneously reflects back, shapeshifts and reflects back our projection. And, but we become entranced by the projective tendencies of the mind, in such a way that we hypnotize ourselves.
Right.
And it's like we've literally put ourselves under a spell. There's no alien entity that's put us under a spell. We ourselves are doing that to ourselves. That's the thing with Wetiko. We have to find out where are we colluding with hypnotizing ourselves, with brainwashing ourselves. And when you realize that, when you tap into that, it unlocks, just like the atomic bomb, it unlocks this incredible energy that's, encoded within the atom. That's like a pale reflection of the unbelievable creative power that each of us have. So I'm pointing out that when you connect with other people who are also having realization in that way, you can put our realization together and, you actually discover, oh my God, we can literally change the dream we're having, the waking dream. And that's to understand that we are actually consciously participating in our own evolution. And that's what Wetiko is offering us. If Wetiko didn't exist, we'd have to invent it. That's how important it is for our evolution.
Well, it's almost like, it reminds me, I can't remember the philosopher, but we're all like dreamers. And in the mind of God, we're just players in the mind of God. Like the whole world is one big dream, and we're characters in the mind of God.
Yeah, we're characters in the mind of God, and we're dream characters being dreamed up by the mind of God, and we're concurrently dreaming. We have an agency too. You see, that's the solution. And I really want to say this so that people can hear this. The solution, it's already been discovered. We've already found the healing, the elixir for all the myriad world crises that our species is not only suffering from, but creating. And that is that we are these creative geniuses. We already have the medicine. We are already in possession of the solution to our world crisis. And it's the creative spirit. That is our nature. But to the extent that we aren't awake to that, we're going to be compelled unconsciously, like in trauma, like with the repetition compulsion, to create more and more amplified destruction. But the point I'm saying is that when enough of us, when we wake up to our creative nature, and we connect with other people who are having that realization, then we can change the dream. And that's what my work is about.
That's fantastic. So, Paul, when can we expect those? I'm already excited about those new books you're writing. With this next one, you're on.
Yeah. This next one, it's just Wetiko, healing the mind virus that plagues our world, and it's actually pointing out that the coronavirus is this lower level emanation of the higher dimensional mind virus Wetiko, and that's coming out in the fall.
In the fall, okay.
In the fall. And then I have another book on Wetiko. We haven't figured out the name for that, and I'm finishing it up, and that's coming out in 2022. So you see, the thing about Wetiko, there's nothing more important in our world than understanding because Wetiko, it's a revelation. You see, it's revealing to us our nature. It's revealing to us that we're living in a dream, our dreamlike nature, our creative genius. It's revealing to us who we are. But if we don't recognize what it's revealing to us, it just assumes it's programmed, sort of like a robotic automatons, sort of function of just destroying us. So that's the quantum nature. If we don't recognize it, it destroys us. If we recognize what it's showing us, then we become empowered creative agents that can fight off the virus. And so I'm just excited that I have 2 new books coming out. Like I said, the first one in the fall. And and I'm just trying to get the word out because, to try to introduce the word to the vernacular.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. It kind of reminds me of the end at the end of the mind parasites. Once the character has overcome the parasites, his creativity, he's able to do these amazing things. It's a very positive book, and I think that's the reality that awaits us, and we allow our own creativity.
That's Colin Wilson in writing. I don't know if you read my article on the mind parasites. I mean, it's
I read both. Yeah,
totally. Because that's exactly it. Colin Wilson was totally on to Wetiko. He just used the medium of fiction, which was so awesome, to point at it. And that's exactly right. When we uninstall Wetiko, from our minds, then what's left is all of a sudden, oh my God, I have this creative genius that I never knew I had, and now I can now it's online, and now I can access it.
It kind of it also explains why his other book called Beyond the Outsider, which I feel is one of the best books on philosophy ever, never got any recognition. I mean, it's almost like his attempt to create a positive existentialism never happened. And I think he understood at some level that's why he had to novelize it and go into novels, and because straight up, a lot of people would just reject that. That would be the way that Wetiko works.
Right. Yeah, no, totally. Well, the thing about, one of the important qualities of Wetiko, and I imagine that we've all had this experience. I know I do every day. When I sit down to write, which I do every day, that's one of my main practices, to write my books. And I'm trying to transduce light and, and to illumine Wetiko and articulate it. Incredible dark forces get evoked. Just in my mind and also in the world, trying to stop me. And, I could easily interpret that like, oh, wow, I should, do something else, or wow, this is an expression I'm really screwed up, or something like that. But no, I've learned to interpret it as like, wow, I'm clearly on the right path. The fact that the darker forces are even interested in trying to stop me. So it inspires me even further. And I think that's what happens when any of us get closer to our light. The darker forces get more fearsome. And it's important to understand, instead of that being a bad thing, no, that's showing you that you're on the right path.
On the right track. So Paul, where can people get your books? What, Awakening the Dream?
Yeah, exactly. To www.awakeninthedream is my website. And the one thing I've gotten criticized, it's not monetized. The only money thing is you can buy my books there that I'll autograph, or, if you want to talk to me, do a private session. But other than that, everything's free. Just a ton of interviews like this, a zillion articles, because I just want to get this work out, whatever. So yeah, that, and then, from that website, you can, there's a contact Paul, and, you can send me an email, and I read every email. And it's a little bit hard for me to respond to everyone, but I try my best.
So for those who might be having a spiritual experience or spiritual initiation, this also is a good website, at least.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, I'm in private practice helping people who are having spiritual awakenings. You know, I've been doing it for over 25 years because, you know, I know that terrain. I've been there, done that, and I'm still a work in progress. It's not like I'm anything special. But I'm so familiar with that phenomena, you know.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. I'll make sure I include those links at the end of this talk, and we hope to maybe catch up after your next book comes out. We'll do a little talk on that.
That would be great. I would love that. When the book comes out in the fall, we can connect, and you know, I'd love to be on again. Really. So I just want to thank you so much.
Have a good one. Okay.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, folks, that brings us to another Philip K. Dick Talks, this one with Paul Levy. If you haven't bought his books, please do so. They're very, very good. They're very informative and truly insightful into the nature of what's happening to us as humans and opening the possibilities for the future. If you haven't done so, please subscribe to our website and like that button so this way we can get a little bit more on the rankings. We got to work with the YouTube Wetiko after all in order to move up. So until then, have a good night, good afternoon, or good morning, wherever you are. And God bless. And we'll speak to you real soon. Bye-bye.